The first thing I want to say is that I'm really sorry about my CPU usage. It is very laggy at the moment. So when I play the track, I'm gonna have to close the playlist because it physically doesn't actually work that well when I play it. It's just the way it works with the record. Anyway, if I play it like this, it's a bit better. Somewhat. So I thought that I could just talk a bit about a few tips and tricks you might be able to learn from my new track, No Love, by showing the project file. I thought I could first touch on the kick, because I get a lot of questions about how you make your kick sound punchy in the mix. My first tip for getting a good kick is, you guessed it, buy a good sample pack. Or just go through a bunch of good sample packs, because honestly, you can't polish it, you know what. Some people, they try to create their own kicks, and that's great, you can do that, but if you're just starting out and you're not really sure what a good kick sounds like, it's important to get a sample that you know works already. Another way to do that is actually to sample a kick from an actual track. I've sampled kicks from some PsyTrance tracks and then put them into my own tracks, and as a result of that, I've learned what a good kick sounds like, and I've been able to do things like make sample packs where I make the kicks from scratch. Specifically to PsyTrance, you want to make sure your kick doesn't interfere with the bass, and it's all about having room for the kick and room for everything in the mix. So first thing you might want to think about is making sure that your kick ends at the right time. So if you look at the kick I'm using here, usually a PsyTrance kick is around 217 milliseconds or something, if you have a look here. And why that's the case is because the BPM is 140, and so around 200 or whatever milliseconds, that's when the bass will be coming in. And so just make sure your kick rolls off at that time, if you want it to sound like how this track sounds like anyway. There's always, there's no right or wrong with mixing. The way I processed my kick was I grabbed a kick from a sample pack. I thought it was compressed quite a bit, so I actually messed with the volume here, just added a bit of a tail onto it, and added a hi-hat on top. What kind of hi-hat are you after? Generally something that hits most of the frequencies in the high end, so that you can really make use of it, because the hi-hat is meant to just add a bit on top. A lot of PsyTrance kicks, they have a lot of high end, as opposed to things like techno, where it's just a really rumbly, deep thumping bass. PsyTrance is very punchy, it's very high-end heavy. In terms of processing on the kicks, you don't really need to do much, because, like I said before, as long as you have a good sample, things like compression or multi-band compression, you don't really need to worry about it. If you are working on your own sample, if you're making your own sample, you might want to think about things like compression and multi-band compression, especially. That's generally what I use when I'm making kicks. I can explain making kicks if you're interested in a whole other tutorial, if that's something that you're interested in. So with my kicks, I usually have them around 0 decibels, so that's like the loudest in the mix, or -6. Generally, if I have it at 0 dB, so if I had this kick playing there, oh, no, not there. If I was playing at 0 dB right here, I would go to my master and turn it down -6. It's just because I don't want to have to listen to the distortion on my master, so I put a bit of headroom in there. Vice versa, if I want to make the kick -6 dB, I don't have to worry about putting the master down to -6. Yeah, so all I've really done with this track is keep the kick at -6. I'm pretty sure that no other sounds are really louder than it, apart from maybe the bass, but most of the time I have all the other sounds quite a bit softer, and that's just a way to make the kick sound like it's punchy. A lot of people, they add an extreme amount of compression onto their kicks, and they're trying to just make it sound louder in the mix, and all I'm going to say is that you just turn down everything else, because you're just going to overcompress everything, and it's all going to sound very muddy once it goes into the master, especially if you're trying to master the track afterwards and you're adding even more compression onto it. So the kick's at -6, and I've just got one effect, and that's an EQ, where I just take away some of the mids. And that's not really to do with the kick itself, it's just to do with the kick in reference to, relative to the mix of the whole track. So for my bass, I've got a few layers. I've got the main sub, then I have this one, which is the main punch, and this one. So altogether, this one's useless. They just work nicely together, I think anyway, for the track. So with the sub, some people try to just use a sine wave for the sub, and they think that the bass will come from that. That's great, but when you're working in a track like this, where it's in D, a sub hitting at that lower frequency, it won't be able to be heard on most speakers that are, around like 5 inches and stuff. So what I did was I used a saw wave, because it has quite a few more overtones on top. If I show you the EQ, played it. So we see here, we have the main tone, then we have all these other frequencies playing on the top. And what you're hearing is actually not really this one, because it's quite a bit low, but I think this frequency is the main sweet spot when you're working with tracks as low as D. D might sound great, and this frequency might be heard on really big sound systems, but when you're working on speakers like the ones I have, which are 5 inches, you won't be able to hear that low bass. And so what I do to compensate for that is to emphasize the frequencies on top. It's a similar technique that's used by plugins like Max Bass, by Waves, where they add frequencies on top, which gives you the impression that the bass is louder, but it's just because it's emphasizing the other tones, the other harmonics on top. Having said that, that's because this track is in D. When the track is in something like F or G, F works really well on my speakers anyway, so I can sort of more focus on the main tone of F because it's just a bit higher and you can hear it to the speakers better. So the main punch of the bass comes from this sample, which is, I think it's from a Talpa sample pack. Generally I like to create my own basses, but this time I tried using this sample and it sounded really nice, so I kept with it. And if you're just going to change your, like, a lot of people have an idea that you got to just use your own presets, or you only can create your own samples, but really if it sounds good, it is good. And there was a bit of extra work that was involved with this one. I added a bit of stereo using this little preset I've created, just a few EQ and things like that. Yeah. If you are an FL Studio user, it's perfectly fine to just create sidechain by literally using volume automation. For my sub bass, because I wanted the sidechain to be different, I've actually just created this automation and duplicated it on all my basses, as in all the sub basses. And it's just because I have much more control over it. I mean, obviously, things like LFO Tool are great. I don't have LFO Tool, so I'm a bit of a cheap boy and only use Kickstart. But I think it's perfectly fine to use automation clips, especially because FL Studio, it's so easy to just duplicate them all over the place. Maybe I might touch on a bit about creating sort of dubstep PsyTrance fusion drops, like the one you hear. I love doing this kind of style because I don't hear much of it in PsyTrance, and I think it works. They work really well together. A really good tip for working with drops and making them really quickly is to actually work on separate projects where you make just one sound and then you sample it, and so you get one sound, then you record it, and then you put it into your sample library. So if you have a look here, I've got my own little kit of different basses I've created. And if I go to my drops section, this is all just drops that I've created, and I can drag them in and slice them up and make them work with my own drops. Yeah, so you can see already how easy that would be to just click and drag that in, just add a kickstart onto it, put a bit of oh, there's a few effects in this actually. There's quite a few effects in it, but do a bit of high passing, add your own sub bass to it, and they work really well together. The main thing to understand is, keeping it understandable. You don't want too many sounds coming in at once and making it hard for people to take in everything that's happening. I think there's just one sound that I created in this project, and that's basically what's causing my CPU to die. I think the main cause of my computer messing up so much is that I'm using Serum, which is, I love Serum, but man, the CPU is crazy. So this bass was actually inspired by Amir, the Melbourne producer, because shout out to Amir, he's a great guy. I love that sort of trance, growly bassline thing he does. If you can hear it, there you go. And this is just very simple anyway. All I did was I got a wavetable that looks like this. I don't know where it's from. It might just be in the stock Serum wavetables. Just added a bit of a movement on it here, really quick. There, and then let a filter sweep it back down, just like a PsyTrance bass or something. So over here, it's a bit of a filter, and I'm guessing, yeah, I just got a bit of multi-band compression and no reverb. I thought I'd tried putting reverb in, but clearly the mix is down, so it's not really doing anything. Yeah, there is another thing here, but that's just, what is that? Yeah, it's doing nothing. Half the time I just have, you're experimenting and just open random things. Yeah, so that's really all I really wanted to talk about today. I just wanted to show a few little things about the project and not go too in depth with it, because I didn't want to make it too long. Attention span of people these days is quite limited, especially if I'm just doing a tutorial for the first time. If you want to see something about this project or anything really, let me know, and I could see about making another tutorial. I don't know if I would. I'll see how well this one goes. If I think it's helping people and it's actually having an influence, then I'd consider doing another one that's gonna, help everyone. So yeah, what do you want to see? Tell me. Cool. Thank you. My track is still out, so go have a listen and enjoy.